Let me introduce Professor John Reuben Davies, who is the research officer of the Arts College of Glasgow University, and is going to present a topic on heritage minorities in Bengal, strategies of survival. And with all my greatest pleasure, I welcome you, sir, to deliver your address.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll just make this bigger. There we are. So thank you very much indeed for inviting me to speak here today. It's a great privilege, and this trip is my first trip to Kerala, but not to India. But in Kerala I found a beautiful state full of people whose warmth corresponds to the climate in which you live. So thank you. And the food's been a revelation too. So what I'm going to talk about relies to a certain extent on your indulgence. In the specific context of today, I'm pleading the special relationship between the people of Kerala and Bengal to excite your interest, because I shall be speaking exclusively about West Bengal. But I am bringing in the themes of migration and heritage and the loss of heritage. Now, 2 years before the pandemic, a group of us who had been meeting one way or another since 2016 to talk about issues around cultural heritage in Bengal started thinking in a more concentrated way about what it means to live in a community of minority heritage. There we are. So, what did it mean to live in a community of minority heritage? We wanted to know more about strategies for survival, especially among the communities of minority heritage in Kolkata. The communities we started thinking about were all living embodiments of a minority heritage. We wanted to know more about, they're all living embodiments of a minority heritage interacting with pressures from outside, the pressures of an urban environment expanding in a demographic explosion, the pressures of neoliberal markets, the pressures of cultures responding to globalization. Our original concern was therefore with heritage and with contrasting types of minority heritage communities. We had two types of communities in mind. There are the diaspora communities belonging specifically to Calcutta. Their heritage lies in diasporas of the 17th century and the 20th. 17th, 18th and 20th century. Armenians, Baghdadi Jews, Chinese, each having a culture and history that has contributed to Calcutta's urban landscape and socio-cultural makeup in important ways. Their heritage is entwined with the cosmopolitan nature of the city. The dwindling of their numbers marks a change in the city's intrinsic character. Preliminary studies carried out by my collaborators in Calcutta indicated that diaspora minority communities are permeated by a sense of the irredeemable loss of their heritage. But the sense of regret and sometimes alarm that was evident in some quarters was perhaps felt more as a sense of nostalgia in others. Then there are the communities which straddle the border of India and Bangladesh. The Bengali Kumars or Murtikaras or Shilpis, the deity sculpture makers, often known as idol makers, who have a particular heritage of caste and applied art. They largely share the surname Pal. In Calcutta, they live in a defined northern suburb, Kumartuli, and in several localities of the southern metropolitan zone. Comparable communities of significant size inhabit Siliguri, 350 miles north of Kolkata, and Barisal in Bangladesh, as well as parts of Dhaka. Now, Armenian migration to India, overwhelmingly from Iran, commenced in the 16th century. Meanwhile, the first Jews arrived in Calcutta from Syria in 1798, a century after the city's foundation. And the first known Chinese migrants to Kolkata in the modern period arrived in 1778. These heritage minority diaspora communities have been rapidly depopulated. In Kolkata, the Chinese, from a peak of 20,000 in the 1960s, are now estimated at 2,000. The Armenians, at independence, a flourishing community of 3,000 to 4,000, presently number under 200. The Baghdadi Jews are on the verge of disappearance, with between 20 and 30 persons remaining in Kolkata, having once been a community of up to 4,000 in the 1930s. In Kolkata's Bangladeshi counterpart, Dhaka, the historic Armenian, Jewish, and Chinese communities disappeared after partition. In West Bengal, state-led efforts at nationalizing the social space and building a nation have some relation to the other processes of migration, and can help us understand the background to the crisis that the diaspora communities in particular face. In 1962, the Sino-Indian War, for example, brought in its wake a series of litigations concerning the identity of the Chinese of Kolkata and their mass outmigration to the People's Republic of China and other countries. But in order to perhaps tie in a little with Ophira's talk, I'll say something more about the Jewish community of Kolkata. For the Jewish community, religious services at the magnificent late 19th century Magen David synagogue at the crossing of Brabourne Road with Canning Street have ceased a long while ago. And there are other neighboring synagogues, the Neve Shalom synagogue, built in 1831. This is rather less known, tends to be left in obscurity, and there's also the Beth El synagogue dating from 1856. But along with the Armenians, the Greeks, the Parsis, the Chinese, the Jews brought a special cosmopolitan quality to colonial Calcutta. And as the community developed from the end of the 18th century, it drew on migrants from the Baghdadi or Middle Eastern Jewish community, and the city became a hub for Jewish enterprise and trade, connecting with Shanghai in the east and London in the west, and all important cities in between. And there's still the feeling among the remaining population that their ancestors made an indelible impact on the city. The Kolkata Jews owned jute mills, cigarette companies, textile and export firms. Then the Bene Israeli Jews from Bombay also started coming to the city, as well as European Jews in the 1930s. But with independence, partition riots, difficulties of trading in post-independence India, many decided to migrate to the USA, to Australia, to Canada, to the UK. And it seems actually that only a small number of the Calcutta Jews emigrated straight to Israel. And preliminary studies by my colleagues in Calcutta gives evidence that Calcutta is still viewed as their homeland by those who left. The synagogues and cemeteries are now looked after with care by non-Jews, and the Jewish schools now have majority Muslim students. There was a similar story of emigration for better prospects in North America among the Armenians. The public institutions of heritage minorities which helped in the building and consolidation of the rich socio-cultural heritage of Calcutta, schools, places of worship, newspapers, eating places, clubs, associations now face dilapidation, although there is some re-emergence and regrowth among the Chinese community of these establishments. The potential extinction of these communities has consequences, though, not only for the communities themselves, but just as importantly for the cityscape with all its cultural diversities. As I said at the beginning, the work we began in Kolkata builds on a distinction between heritage minorities and ethnic minorities. We think that lived heritage can't survive as a museum piece or without developing some synergy with the surrounding world. And we hypothesize that strategies of survival are pitched in the middle space, spanning the twin extremes of complete assimilation and complete social isolation. But these groups are also fundamentally different. The Chinese, for example, belong to a giant and economically powerful international culture, while the indigenous shilpis embody a specific localized culture. But in their contexts in Calcutta, they are, in a sense, equally living out a very particular way of life, with all kinds of traditions integral and associated to that life. So at the beginning of our thoughts, we'd clubbed together the community of shilpis, the sculptors, with other heritage minorities of cosmopolitan Kolkata. The Jews, the Armenians, and the Chinese. And we intended originally to do a collective study of these cohort groups who are eking out their existence in the face of these adversities. But we soon realized that Kumartuli and its shilpis, the artists, the sculptors, the potters, struck a different chord and demanded an independent study. Despite being faced with a multitude of challenges, they refused to be a mere case study of the commonplace theme of heritage in crisis, heritage crying out for conservation. And it was my colleagues in the University of Calcutta, Vishnupriya Basak and Shoumya Das, who are the real intellectual force behind our project. And it was they who recognized this point. The goddess Durga looks so magnificent, so dazzling, so beguiling because of the brilliance of the idol makers of Kumartuli. And they intuitively realized the limitations of the simple, commonplace narrative long before the ethnographies that we eventually produced could vindicate their view. So what lay ahead was a rather delicate task, because the projected methodology was to interview the pratima shilpis. And Basak and Das were aware of treading, as they put it, on the soft clay of unknown terrains. The University of Glasgow's Arts Lab, where I'm an associate director, this is our University of Glasgow's interdisciplinary research institute in the arts and humanities. And this is where Ophira and I are co-directors also of a research theme on heritage, urban studies and development. We were able to collaborate on a symposium, and this event was crucial for testing the waters for this project in Kumatuli. And this was the turning point for the project and marked the beginning of a durable network with an intricate connectivity that spread into the winding lanes of the world's largest potter's hub and beyond. Shomen Pal, who was a talented pratima shilpi in his late 30s with his ancestral studio in Kumatuli, became the anchor of this project in Kumatuli, and he has remained so. And in order to ensure the cross-disciplinary perspective, we also invited 11 resource people from diverse fields: art history, Bengal studies, sociology and social anthropology, art and aesthetics, architectural engineering, politics and government, archaeology and literature. And we invited them to the symposium along with Shomen. Now, the pratima shilpis are unique in charting out ways in which they seek to reach out to the public. There's no one golden formula. While they remain engaged in turning out traditional images, following the Shastric prescriptions, texts and law, their cultural goods are sourced by the market, fueling what are known as the themed pujas, the corporate-funded extravaganzas dominating the cultural scene of Bengal for the past 2 decades. And the creative art, like pratima shilpa, can seldom remain confined to iconographic prescriptions. Now, we were keen on probing the paradoxical relation between the shilpis and their heritage, and we identified 3 principal challenges faced by the community of idol makers. First, art, then the market, and then migration. And we found ways to decode why art, as the act of the avant-garde few, is consumed and appreciated not only by the elite few, but by the many. We also realized that heritage can ignore the market only at its own peril. And we were interested in knowing, for instance, how individual idol makers negotiate with the market demands without totally surrendering to them. Finally, the question of mobility and migration. By all accounts, it's migration that splits the shilpis into 2 communities, with their styles in particular. Styles that are particular, if not peculiar, to them. The migrants from Shantipur and Krishnanagar, who migrated in the 19th century with the introduction of the publicly organized pujas. These marked the first entry of the goddess Durga into the city's public spaces in the 19th century, and her worship as a public act. Then, on the other side, as it were, there are those shilpis from former East Bengal, East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, who had migrated at partition. So we can see, as it were, 2 groups. And the biggest challenge that my colleagues faced in their field interviews was accessibility to the elderly pratima shilpis, those who create the main image, and the saj shilpis, the artisans who make the accessories for the image, most of whom were too old and too infirm. Yet they were the critical custodians and narrators of heritage because they had been hereditarily engaged with the profession. And this is the point, that it is an hereditary profession passed down from father to son in perpetuity over generations. Apparently, strains of despair, agony, and betrayal hung in the air as Vishnupriya and Shomir moved from one studio to another, and they recounted their daily encounter with rising costs, changing tastes, the tightening noose of taxation and government regulations, and a breakdown of the familial network system. But what shone through was what they describe as the throbbing creativity that dared to defy the odds with its unstoppable flow of creative energy and to profound self-esteem and professionalism. And this forced a rethinking of the approach to heritage. The intense attachment to the shilpis' creative process, despite their biting poverty and penury, was unmistakable and even tangible. They asked one shilpi how he felt once the idol was completed, and he replied, "A sense of mirth prevails with a sense of lament. I feel saddened by the idol's departure from my studio. It's akin to the forlornness a father feels on the daughter's departure for her in-laws. No money can replenish this." Another revered idol maker of Shantipur, speaking in his humble abode overlooking a busy lane, said, "When I accept the order, it's my sole responsibility." And this man was in his 90s, and Vishnupriya and Shomir were struck by the resoluteness in this old man's face, and such determination was a revelation to them. But there are still many tales that are yet to be heard, perhaps untold. Conversations with the younger generation, who are striving to make their place in the avant-garde themed pujas, apparently spoke of a disconnectedness with the traditional styles and iconographies. And looking deeper, one could identify tussles and tensions in their art and desperation to carve out a niche in a world which still remains hesitant to acclaim the art as opposed to the craft of Kumartuli. There is this important distinction that some want to see themselves as artists, but others really as artisans. So here were some vignettes from the fieldwork from our project. So this led to our second workshop, again funded and facilitated by Arts Lab, but convened by Vishnupriya Vasak and Shomir Das. And here we are. These are some of the institutions involved in that workshop. This workshop took place in November 2019 and became the facilitating forum for the contributing authors to meet and discuss the plan a volume on the basis of the fieldwork that had been undertaken in the meantime. The field survey which Arts Lab was able to fund, and it spread out over 4 months and emerged as a priceless archive, and indeed forms the basis of the volume published by Springer in the late summer of 2021, The Making of Goddess Durga. In 2022, the volume was reissued in paperback and coincided with the inscription of the Durga Puja of Kolkata in UNESCO's list of the world's intangible cultural heritage. But the nomination dossier was perhaps part of a scholarship which tends to treat heritage as a sum total of static traits frozen in time. Viewed in this light, The pratima shilpis, or idol makers, embodying the heritage of a hereditarily transmitted skill, are viewed, as I've already mentioned, as being in some kind of perpetual crisis, finding it difficult to adapt to the changing conditions. But the studies which our group of academic collaborators produced, headed by Vishnupriya Basak and Shoumya Das in collaboration with Arts Lab, our studies test and contest this notion of heritage. And we hope to have shown how the groups and communities experience and navigate through changing conditions, often contributing to the making of these very conditions. We focus not on cities, but cityscapes, on coincidences, conjunctures, and accidents, and not on a flat, linear history. We concentrated on iconography not as a study in execution of scriptural formulations, but on how innovations are continuously accommodated within a system of rules and vice versa. And finally, on how the heritage of idol making brings the public into existence, and on the intricate yet problematic relation that exists between the two. So finally, to condense the findings of our project in this talk, the main conclusion is that a heritage doesn't survive by isolating itself from the larger society. Rather, it must attract its synergies from the rest of that society, remain constantly connected to the diverse and various spheres and constituencies around it, and to rise above the boundaries that otherwise separate them. Unlike the way it's understood in a conventional study of heritage, heritage conservation in this case is a function of its ability to connect. And through that ability to connect, to bring a public into existence instead of keeping it fractured and fragmented. The heritage of idol making is unlikely to survive if it remains restricted to the small caste of kumbhakas, if the idols are not bought by others, if the organizers don't organize the pujas, if the general masses don't offer subscriptions, if the sponsors and corporates don't come forward and offer their hand of help, if the authorities don't grant permissions, if the artisans don't set up the pandals, if the priests don't perform puja rituals, if the general public don't see them, and so forth. So Durga Puja works on an intricately woven network of people that encompasses the entire society. And Ophira produced a profound insight about this in a conversation we were having only yesterday. She described this phenomenon as a grammar. And if I may take this idea of a grammar and run with it, it means there must be a whole and integrated system and structure for the language of Durga Puja to be constructed and spoken into existence every year. But that grammar allows the language to be expressed and articulated in almost infinite permutations. It allows adaptations and mutations and variations of expression and evolution within a framework that can always make itself understood. Thank you.